Imagine a photograph of like a gritty, exhaust-filled city street.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So the asphalt is cracked, the buildings are covered in soot, and the tension of, just urban decay is palpable.
Super bleak.
Super bleak. But then, shimmering right through the concrete, ghosting over the high-rises, is this serene, sunlit forest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like two completely different realities occupying the exact same frame.
A double exposure photograph.
Exactly. And that is exactly what happens in the text we are exploring today on this deep dive. We are jumping into Isaiah chapter 33 from the King James Version.
And we really have a massive stack of historical and theological sources today to help us unpack this.
We do, because this document, it operates as the ultimate double exposure photograph. On the surface layer, we're looking at the gritty, terrifying, historical reality of ancient Jerusalem under a brutal military siege.
Right.
But bleeding right through that terror is the eternal, majestic reality of the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, the technical term scholars often use for this is a prophetic bridge or a typological overlay.
Typological overlay, I like that.
So the prophet Isaiah ben Amos wrote this material roughly between 740 and 681 BC.
Okay.
But this specific chapter, which actually serves as the climactic oracle in a section often called the Book of Woes.
The Book of Woes, which sounds intense.
Oh, it is. It pinpoints a very specific, horrifying moment. We are anchored around the year 701 BC during the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah.
Gotcha.
And the geopolitical atmosphere in Jerusalem at this exact moment is not just, anxious. It is sheer, unadulterated terror.
Right, and we really need to understand the scale of that terror to understand anything else in this text.
Absolutely.
So imagine you are locked inside a walled city. The greatest, most ruthless military superpower the ancient world had ever seen is outside.
The Assyrian war machine.
Exactly. Led by King Sennacherib, they are literally camped outside your gates.
Yeah.
And the horrific realization washing over the city is that all your political treaties...
Every single one.
Yeah, all the alliances, all the bribes you used to protect yourself, they have just failed spectacularly. You are completely trapped.
And that is the exact friction point where Isaiah 33 begins.
It really sets the scene.
It does. And to fully grasp the sheer panic inside those walls, we have to look at the historical data regarding how the Assyrians actually operated.
Because they weren't just like regular soldiers.
No, they didn't simply defeat rival armies. They were architects of psychological warfare.
Wow.
Their military strategy relied heavily on calculated terror. I mean, mass deportations, the flaying of captive leaders, the complete leveling of rebellious cities.
So they wanted to win the battle in your mind before it even started.
Exactly. They wanted their reputation to do the work before a single arrow was fired.
That is terrifying.
So to appreciate the majestic deliverance that the text promises at the end of the chapter, we really have to deeply analyze the existential threat at the beginning.
Right.
And the prophetic text refers to this invading force with a very specific title. It calls them the spoiler.
The spoiler. Which brings us right to the opening lines of the chapter. Verse 1 hits like an absolute hammer.
Read it for us.
It says, "Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled, and when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee."
It's powerful.
Yeah.
And the Hebrew vocabulary here is incredibly precise. It carries massive theological weight.
Let's break that down.
Sure. So the word translated as spoilest is shaddad.
Shaddad.
Right. And it signifies much more than just winning a military engagement. Shaddad involves violent extractivism.
Extractivism, like taking without giving.
Exactly. It's the act of forcefully stripping a culture of its wealth, its resources, its people, its dignity, and giving absolutely nothing in return. It's parasitic by nature.
Wow, okay. And what about treacherously?
The text pairs it with the word bagad. This term specifically denotes acting underhandedly, covering up deceit, or violating a sacred covenant.
So it's a fundamental betrayal of trust.
Yes. A massive diplomatic betrayal.
And there is a pretty devastating historical anchor for this specific betrayal, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
The sources highlight an event that's often called the Hezekiah incident.
Right. This is crucial.
Because Hezekiah, he's desperate to save his people from being butchered or deported, right? So he tries to play the diplomatic game.
He tries to buy them off.
Literally, he empties the national treasury. He pays Sennacherib this staggering ransom, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold.
It was an unbelievable sum.
Hezekiah even strips the gold overlay off the doors of the temple of God just to meet this extortion demand.
He essentially attempts to pay the neighborhood bully to just walk away.
But it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. The historical records confirm that Sennacherib gladly accepted the massive tribute. He took all the silver and the gold.
Right.
And then, demonstrating the absolute essence of that treachery, he marched his army down to Jerusalem to lay siege to it anyway. The sources we're reviewing describe this kind of failed human diplomacy beautifully. They liken it to hiding decay behind the painted face of international relations.
A painted face?
Yeah, the Assyrian king took the treasure, smiled at the ambassadors, and then immediately drew his sword.
Which leaves Judah utterly defenseless and bankrupt.
Completely.
But, this is where the text introduces a really fascinating cosmic mechanism. God institutes what the sources call the law of divine return.
Or the law of divine reciprocity.
Right, like a cosmic boomerang effect. The text pronounces a woe upon the spoiler, basically decreeing that the destroyer will inevitably be destroyed.
When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled.
Exactly. The moment Sennacherib finishes spoiling, he himself will be spoiled. It's an immutable law of the spiritual universe. You reap exactly what you sow.
And what's remarkable is that this isn't simply a piece of poetic comfort for traumatized people.
It actually happened.
It is a verifiable historical prophecy. Our sources point out that this exact reversal occurred in 620-12 BC.
Okay, what happened then?
The capital city of the Assyrian Empire, Nineveh, which was a city that seemed completely invincible, fortified with massive walls and seemingly unlimited extracted wealth, it fell.
Wow.
It fell to a coalition of Babylonians and Medes. The ancient Greek historian Diodorus Siculus actually recorded that the Medes predicted the fall of Nineveh based on ancient oracles.
Even when breaching the city seems logically impossible.
Exactly. The empire that built its entire identity on making victims of others became the ultimate victim. They were spoiled by the exact same violent tactics they had unleashed on the ancient Near East.
That cosmic boomerang always comes back.
It really does.
The sources we're looking at draw a really fascinating modern parallel here to what they call digital feudalism.
Right, the modern application of this.
Yeah. The argument is that we can map the anatomy of this ancient treachery onto modern systems. They suggest that massive monopolistic tech conglomerates often act as a modern spoiler.
In this analogy, everyday users are essentially forced into these complex treaties.
Right, the impenetrable terms of service agreements that dictate modern digital life. Nobody reads them, but you have to agree to them.
And the structural comparison those sources make is highly compelling when you examine the mechanics of extraction. In that model, the user acts in good faith.
Exactly. We provide our personal data, our daily attention, our creative output to the platform.
Yes, and the argument is that the tech giants operating as a modern shade ad, they extract all of that immense value without providing equitable merit in return.
They leverage the data to build trillion-dollar empires, and then they engage in bagad.
Treachery.
Right.
Yeah.
They change the algorithmic rules overnight. They obscure how the data is sold. They act underhandedly.
The sources frame it as a system inherently built on extracting value from a vulnerable user base while constantly shifting the terms of the covenant. Now, just to be clear for the listener, we are just imparting what these sources argue impartially.
Absolutely. We aren't taking sides on tech policy, just relaying the analogy. But the underlying warning of Isaiah 33 is that any systemic architecture built on extraction, whether it's an Iron Age empire or a modern digital ecosystem, will eventually collapse under its own moral rot.
The chapter posits a universal principle. When a system relies entirely on treachery, it creates a level of internal complexity and corruption that must eventually turn on itself.
The boomerang cannot be outrun.
It cannot.
But the terrifying reality for the people of Jerusalem is that before the boomerang returns, the situation on the ground has to hit rock bottom.
And it really does.
Verses 7 through 9 paint a picture of just absolute desolation. The text reads, "Behold, their valiant ones shall cry without. The ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly. The highways lie waste. The wayfaring man ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant, he hath despised the cities, he regardeth no man."
These are Hezekiah's top diplomats.
The best and brightest political minds of the nation are literally weeping in the streets.
Because they realize they have been completely played. It is the ultimate bankruptcy of human statecraft.
Right.
When a bad actor deliberately chooses to ignore the established rules of engagement, conventional diplomats have no leverage left. Their treaties are nothing more than worthless parchment.
Yeah, but what elevates this passage from a mere historical chronicle to a profound piece of poetic literature is how the environment itself reacts to the moral crisis.
It's incredible imagery.
The text doesn't just describe human weeping, it describes ecological weeping. Verse 9 says, "The earth mourneth and languisheth. Lebanon is ashamed and hewn down. Sharon is like a wilderness, and Bashan and Carmel shake off their fruits."
Which is devastating.
Right, because for a listener today, those might just sound like random ancient cities, but to the original audience.
To the original audience, those 4 geographic locations were the ancient gold standard for immense, robust natural vitality.
Okay, tell us about them.
Well, Lebanon was world-renowned for its majestic, towering cedar forests. They represented strength and permanence. The coastal plain of Sharon was famous for lush, unparalleled fertility and vibrant flowers.
So beautiful landscapes.
Beautiful. Bashan, located to the east, was the agricultural center for rich pastures and the finest livestock. And Carmel was celebrated for its dense, fruitful vineyards and orchards.
But the text strips all of that glory away.
It does.
The cedars are hewn down, the lush plains become a desert, the vineyards shake off their fruit before the harvest. The very earth is having a visceral reaction to the spirit of death brought by the invading army.
It is an environmental reflection of human sin. The hubris and violence of the spoiler don't just traumatize the civilian population, they literally drain the life force out of the soil.
So if human diplomacy has completely failed, if the greatest political minds are weeping in the streets and the very ecosystem is collapsing around them, what does the faithful remnant inside the city do?
They look in the only direction left to them.
They turn upward.
Exactly. And this is the precise moment where Isaiah 33 transitions from a local historical crisis into a massive, unseen spiritual reality. The parameters of the text suddenly expand.
This is where that double exposure photograph really comes into sharp focus. We are no longer just looking at the Assyrian army setting up siege ramps.
Right.
We are looking at a prophetic template that stretches across millennia.
And we really have to introduce the concept of biblical typology here, which is essential for understanding prophetic literature.
Typology, right. Break that down for the listener.
Typology is the study of how historical events, persons, or institutions in the Old Testament serve as real historical shadows that point forward to a greater ultimate reality, the substance in the New Testament or the end of times.
So the spoiler in verse 1 is genuinely Sennacherib.
Yes.
But prophetically, Sennacherib serves as an archetype.
Precisely. The theological sources we are drawing from explicitly map this treacherous figure directly to Revelation chapter 13.
Oh, wow, all the way to Revelation.
They connect him to the beast system and the ultimate Antichrist figure, often referred to in Scripture as the man of sin.
So the events of 701 BC are essentially a compressed, seed-form version of the ultimate cosmic end-time storyline.
Yes.
Isaiah 33 is the acorn, and chapters 13 through 21 of Revelation are the massive oak tree.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Consider the exact nature of the treachery. Just as Sennacherib entered into a treaty with Judah, took their wealth, and then treacherously broke that covenant to destroy them.
Right.
The prophet Daniel in chapter 9, verse 27, prophesies that the final world deceiver will operate using the exact same playbook.
Exact same one.
He will confirm a holy covenant with many, establish a false peace, and then treacherously break it, laying waste to the earth.
So the historical crisis of the Assyrian invasion is a shadow casting forward to the ultimate final crisis of human history, which implies something profound for you, the listener. The response of the faithful people in Isaiah 33 isn't just ancient history. It is the exact required blueprint for anyone facing a seemingly invincible, treacherous system today.
Absolutely.
In verse 2, the remnant cries out, they pray, "O Lord, be gracious unto us. We have waited for thee. Be thou their arm every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble."
And notice the posture of that prayer. It is one of absolute terrifying dependence.
Yeah, they aren't bringing God a plan or rubber stamp.
Right. They are not asking God to bless their newly formed political strategies. They aren't asking God to endorse their military maneuvers. They have exhausted all their maneuvers.
They're asking God to be their literal strength, their very arm. Every single morning they wake up to face the siege.
They're throwing themselves entirely on unmerited grace.
And God's response to this desperate cry in verse 6 is so counterintuitive. He says, "And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure."
It is vital to look at what God pointedly omits from that promise.
So it's missing.
He does not promise them sudden military superiority. He does not grant them a new, clever political leverage to out-negotiate the Assyrians.
Right. He promises that wisdom and knowledge will be their stability.
Because in the biblical framework, true stability is never political, economic, or martial. True stability is spiritual endurance born out of a reverent awe, the fear of the Lord.
You cannot out-scheme the spoiler.
No.
You cannot out-finance a system that has already proven it is perfectly willing to steal from you. Your only true stability in a time of manufactured chaos is knowing the ultimate truth and refusing to let go of it.
That's right.
But, while the remnant inside the walls is praying for wisdom and holding on to the fear of the Lord, what is happening outside the walls? The sources dive deeply into the unseen spiritual warfare happening behind the scenes. The mechanics of it are just fascinating.
They really are. We have to view the ancient world through the lens of the divine council worldview, which permeates the text.
The divine council worldview. Okay.
The sources highlight that the spoiler is not merely acting on human ambition. Human ambition is being inflamed and manipulated by darker, unseen forces.
Like demonic forces.
Right. The Apostle Paul later refers to these in Ephesians as rulers of the darkness of this world. These demonic entities incite absolute hubris and megalomania in the minds of treacherous human leaders.
They pushed them to the absolute extreme of arrogance.
Exactly.
And here is where it gets really interesting. The divine irony here is just brilliant. Look at verse 11. God speaks directly to these treacherous nations who are puffed up with their own invincibility and says, "Ye shall conceive chaff, ye shall bring forth stubble. Your breath as fire shall devour you."
That's amazing.
The enemy's own breath, their relentless boasting, their arrogance, their incredibly intricate schemes to destroy others is the exact fuel God uses to ignite their destruction.
They are literally generating the combustible material for their own demise in the unseen realm. It is the pinnacle of divine irony. The Assyrians believe they are breathing out an unstoppable fire to consume the city of Jerusalem. But the spiritual reality is that their breath is the very fire that will consume themselves.
They are metaphorically pregnant with their own destruction.
Every boast, every broken treaty, every act of extortion is just piling up dry stubble around their own feet, waiting for a single spark from the divine.
Wow. So the faithful remnant is praying in desperate dependence. The spoiler is outside boasting and breathing out fire, and the narrative tension is stretched as tight as a bowstring.
It's unbearable tension.
The Assyrians are at the gates, the wealth is gone, the land is dead, and then the text pivots entirely. The tension snaps. God finally steps out of eternity and into the timeline.
We reach the absolute turning point of the chapter.
Yeah.
And typologically, the turning point of human history.
Okay, take us there.
Verses 10 through 13 introduce what scholars refer to as the ultimate now.
The ultimate now.
The text reads, "Now will I rise, saith the Lord. Now will I be exalted. Now will I lift up myself."
Those three sequential nows feel so incredibly weighty. It's as if time just stops.
They represent the absolute limit of divine patience. For years, the spoiler was allowed to plunder. For years, the remnant was forced to endure and wait.
But there is an expiration date on evil.
There is. When God finally decrees now, the era of human corruption, diplomatic treachery, and chaotic instability instantly ends, and the era of unyielding divine order begins.
The sources connect this profound now to a massive typological fulfillment in the New Testament. They link it directly to Hebrews 1.3, which describes the work of Jesus Christ.
Right.
After he purged our sins on the cross, what is the very next action recorded? He sat down on the right hand of the Majesty on high.
The resurrection and subsequent exaltation of Christ is God's supreme cosmic now.
Wow.
When Christ emerged from the tomb, it was the definitive moment God stood up and irrevocably broke the power of death and the ultimate spoiler, Satan.
So the historical defeat of the Assyrian army outside the walls of Jerusalem is just a faint whisper compared to the deafening roar of the resurrection. And when God rises, the judgment unleashed upon the corrupt nations is immediate, total, and devastating. Verse 12 uses terrifying imagery. And the people shall be as the burnings of lime, as thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire.
God takes their massive, synthetic, Babel-like empires and reduces them to basic chemical components.
Ash and lime.
The sources point out the people as plants, metaphor here. The wicked, who thought they were towering cedars, are exposed as nothing more than dried chaff and cut thorns.
In a fraction of a second, they are weighed in the absolute scales of divine justice and found to be entirely weightless.
The pure fire of God's holiness consumes everything that is synthetic, everything that is false, and everything that is built on the foundation of treachery.
But this arrival of divine holiness introduces a deeply terrifying reality for the people inside the city walls.
It does.
Wait, hold on. The text pivots so sharply here. It says in verse 14, "The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings?"
It's a huge shift.
Yeah. Up until this exact moment in the narrative, God was the hero. He was the one arriving to incinerate the Assyrian army and save the city. How does the ultimate savior suddenly become the ultimate terror to the people inside the walls?
This is one of the most profound paradoxes of divine holiness. You have to understand that God's fire does not possess a geographical boundary.
It doesn't stop at the city gates.
Exactly. The sinners in Zion mentioned here are the hypocrites.
Not hypocrites.
These are the individuals who physically resided in the holy city, who routinely attended the temple services, who offered the required sacrifices, and who used the proper religious vocabulary.
They looked the part.
They did, but internally, they secretly relied on the shadow of Egypt for political protection, or they exploited their poorer neighbors to maintain their wealth.
Oh, wow.
They operated under the delusion that their physical proximity to the temple would somehow mask their private iniquity.
But when the holy God actually manifests his presence to defend the city, that delusion shatters.
Completely shattered.
They realize, with sudden, paralyzing fear, that his infinite holiness is completely and utterly incompatible with their hypocrisy. God is not just a bigger, stronger version of an Assyrian king. He is a consuming fire.
Exactly. The theological sources anchor this concept in Hebrews 12:29, which states plainly, "For our God is a consuming fire." We must grasp that the fire itself is not malicious.
Right.
The fire is simply the pure, unadulterated essence of God's nature. It is absolute truth and absolute light. The sources suggest that God deals with human sin through a progression of 3 distinct stages.
What are those stages?
Exposure, judgment, and ultimately forgiveness.
Okay, let's look at those.
When the divine fire arrives, its first function is exposure. It instantly dispels the darkness of self-deception, functioning much like the light described in Romans 13:1. It reveals everything hidden in the dark.
And after exposure comes the judgment, the burning away of the corruption.
Yes, and the fire is entirely consistent, but it is experienced radically differently depending on the nature of the person encountering it.
How so?
To the washed believer, the one who has repented, humbled themselves, and trusted entirely in God's unmerited grace, that exact same fire is experienced as pure light, warmth, and the sweet smell of incense. It is a purifying presence.
But to the unwashed sinner,
To the hypocrite who is desperately clinging to their secret treachery and their extracted wealth, that very same manifestation of God is experienced as absolute terror, as everlasting burnings.
why is it so terrifying to them?
Because the fire is actively consuming the very idols they refuse to release.
Man. And the sources view this as a massive, urgent warning for modern times, specifically addressing what they call cultural Christianity.
This is a really important, impartial observation they make.
Yeah, they frame it as a sociological and spiritual phenomenon where individuals maintain an outward aesthetic form of religion. You identify as being in Zion, you attend the services, you know the cultural markers.
But in your actual day-to-day existence, your operating system is identical to the spoiler.
Yes. You deal treacherously with your employees or your family. You rely on corrupt systems, wealth, or status for your fundamental security, while treating God as like a mascot to bless your endeavors, rather than a sovereign who demands your total allegiance.
It is a devastating critique of nominal faith. Isaiah 33 warns unequivocally that when the presence of God truly arrives, it violently strips away the mascot and reveals the sovereign.
The hypocrisy previously tolerated in the sanctuary is exposed instantly.
The text forces the reader to confront a terrifying reality. It is wholly insufficient to simply be physically or culturally located in Zion. The defining question is, what kind of moral and spiritual citizen are you within Zion?
Which naturally leads to the most desperate question a human being can ask. If God is a devouring fire and no hypocrite can survive that exposure, who can dwell in the presence of this holy God?
Who actually survives the fire without being consumed?
Right. And Isaiah doesn't leave the reader in a state of unresolved terror. He answers the question immediately in verses 15 and 16, laying out the exact qualifications of the righteous citizen.
The prophet provides a comprehensive moral profile of the individual who can endure the divine fire. Verse 15 outlines it. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil.
It's a picture of total systemic integrity.
Yes.
It encompasses every facet of human interaction, how you conduct your daily affairs, the truthfulness of your speech, your visceral rejection of wealth gained through exploitation, your absolute refusal to be bought or compromised, and your conscious decision to protect your mind from consuming violence and evil.
It is an existence that is fundamentally entirely antithetical to the treacherous operating system of the spoiler we met in verse 1.
And we must examine the reward promised for this level of unyielding integrity. Verse 16 states, "He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His water shall be sure."
The munitions of rocks.
I am captivated by that imagery. Imagine the psychological comfort of that promise. The entire known world's economic and political systems are actively collapsing. The invincible Assyrian army is literally turning into ash outside your gates.
But you
are tucked away in an impenetrable high-altitude fortress of solid, unmovable stone. And your daily provisions, your room service, is guaranteed by the creator of the universe himself. Your bread will not run out, and your water will not fail.
It is the ultimate biblical paradigm of security. While the wicked are actively consumed by the fire they fueled with their own arrogant breath, the righteous are preserved in a fortress that cannot possibly be breached.
It's beautiful.
And this dynamic introduces an incredible structural phenomenon in the poetry of the chapter itself. The scholarly sources refer to this as a chiastic structure, which is a literary device used heavily in ancient Hebrew.
A chiastic structure. Let's explain that, because since ancient Hebrew didn't have bold, italics, or underlining to emphasize a point, they used structural mirroring.
Right, it's like a mirror.
You have point A, point B, the central pivot, and then a mirror of point B and a mirror of point A. It forces the listener to see the contrast. Let's look at how the spoil is reversed here.
Let's do it.
In verse 1, it begins with, "Woe to thee that spoilest." The narrative starts with the wicked taking the spoil unjustly. They plunder the weak and the vulnerable.
But then look at the end.
Yeah, as we jump down to verse 23, the text mirrors and reverses the action. Then is the prey divided. The lame take the prey.
The chiasm reveals a complete cosmic inversion of power.
A total flip.
The Assyrian war machine, previously characterized as impossibly strong, wealthy, and ruthless, loses absolutely everything.
And on the flip side,
conversely, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, who have been so weakened, starved, and traumatized by the prolonged siege that the text literally describes them as lame, end up slowly walking out of the city gates.
And what do they find?
They are the ones who divide the massive, unimaginable plunder left behind by the decimated Assyrian army. God reverses the power structures entirely. The wicked take the spoil unjustly at the beginning of the narrative. The righteous receive the spoil righteously at the conclusion.
It is a breathtaking reversal of fortune. But keeping our double exposure photograph in mind, I want to trace this out prophetically.
Let's do that.
What is the ultimate typological fulfillment of this plundering? How does the image of the lame taking the prey map onto the theology of the New Testament?
If we follow the typological threads, the ultimate fulfillment of this reversal is found at the cross of Jesus Christ.
At the cross.
The sources direct us to a profound passage in Colossians chapter 2, specifically verse 15. During the crucifixion, it appeared to the physical world that the ultimate spoiler, Satan, and the unseen forces of darkness had decisively won.
Right, it looked like a total defeat.
It appeared they had successfully spoiled the Son of God, stripping him of his life and dignity. But what was the unseen spiritual reality? The Apostle Paul reveals that on the cross, Christ actually disarmed the powers and authorities. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross.
That is just incredible. So, just as the physically lame, starving citizens of Jerusalem stumbled out of their gates to plunder the vast wealth of the Assyrians, we who are spiritually lame, utterly impoverished and battered by the siege of sin, are invited to walk out and share in the infinite spoil of Christ's cosmic victory.
That is the exact theological parallel. The believer's spoil is not silver or gold. It is eternal life, the definitive defeat of death, and the complete plundering of Satan's kingdom.
Wow.
The cross took the ultimate, most horrifying act of treachery in human history, the murder of the incarnate God, and sovereignly inverted it into the ultimate eternal victory for the lame and the vulnerable.
And having miraculously survived the devouring fire, and having taken the unimaginable spoil, the believer's eyes are finally open to behold the ultimate reward.
And the reward isn't just safety.
No, it isn't merely a pile of discarded Assyrian silver outside the walls. It is something infinitely more profound and beautiful. We transition now into the final section of the chapter, spanning verses 17 through 24, where the text reveals the king in his beauty and the architecture of the eternal city.
Verse 17 contains what many consider to be one of the most sublime promises in all of prophetic literature. It says, "Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold the land that is very far off."
To ground this historically, the people of Jerusalem had spent the duration of the siege seeing their earthly king Hezekiah, dressed in coarse sackcloth, covered in ashes, mourning and weeping in the temple over the impending annihilation of his people.
A king in mourning.
But now, the siege is miraculously lifted, the threat is gone, they finally see their king restored, clothed in his royal robes, radiant with the relief of victory.
But prophetically, typologically, the king in his beauty is not a mortal monarch.
Who is it?
It is the resurrected, glorified Christ. The theological sources use a brilliant term for this. They call Christ the dimensional aperture of God's glory.
Dimensional aperture. I love that.
It means that through the person of Jesus, humanity is finally capable of seeing the infinite, unapproachable beauty of the invisible God without being consumed by the fire.
And the city that this majestic king rules over is utterly, fundamentally transformed. Verse 20 paints a picture of ultimate peace. "Look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken."
The contrast here is incredibly striking when you recall the beginning of the chapter.
Right.
Earlier, the entire ecosystem was mourning. Treaties were being violently broken. The valiant ones were weeping in the streets. Now, Zion is characterized as a quiet habitation.
Of quiet habitation.
The text uses the imagery of a tent, a tabernacle. In the ancient world, a tent usually implies fragility, wandering, and a temporary dwelling.
Right, it's not a stone fortress.
Yet paradoxically, this specific tent has stakes that are driven so deep they will never ever be removed. It represents an eternal, unshakable stability provided entirely by divine power, completely independent of fragile human engineering.
Because the entire governance structure of the city has been radically altered. Verse 22 spells out the new constitution. "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us."
In human political theory, we demand the separation of powers, judicial, legislative, and executive branches, because human nature is inherently corruptible.
Power must be checked by power.
Exactly. But in the New Jerusalem, every single function of government is perfectly and safely united in the singular person of God. There's no separation of powers needed, because there is zero corruption to check.
Wow.
He is perfectly just in his judgments, perfectly wise in his laws, and perfectly sovereign in his executive rule.
And the defense infrastructure of this eternal city is described using a truly brilliant metaphor in verse 21. "But there the glorious Lord will be unto us a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no galley with oars, neither shall gallant ship pass thereby."
It's a fascinating metaphor.
I want to pause here because the geographical anomaly of Jerusalem makes this metaphor so powerful. Most of the great, impregnable cities of the ancient world relied on massive, dominating bodies of water for their military defense and their economic trade.
Egypt was built around the mighty Nile.
Right. Babylon sat astride the massive Euphrates, but Jerusalem had no river. It was built on a mountain and relied on a tiny, vulnerable little water source called the Gihon Spring.
A tiny spring against an Assyrian army.
Exactly. From a military perspective, how is a city with no river supposed to be protected?
That geographical vulnerability is the genius of the metaphor. Because Jerusalem lacked a massive natural river, God himself steps in to become the broad river of protection for the city.
God is the river.
His very presence becomes the impassable moat, the infinite supply line, the unbreachable barrier surrounding his people.
But the text adds a crucial detail about these gallant ships. It explicitly states that no galley with oars will be able to pass through this divine river.
This is a vital nuance. In the ancient world, a broad river was a phenomenal asset for defense, but it carried a massive inherent risk.
What was the risk?
It was also a superhighway for an invading enemy navy. But God declares, I am a river that no enemy ship can possibly navigate.
So no enemy navies.
Spiritually speaking, the sources interpret these gallant ships as representing demonic incursions, the naval forces of the enemy attempting to breach the city. The overwhelming presence of God creates a spiritual no-sail zone. Absolutely no treacherous power, no spiritual entity, no spoiler can navigate the waters of God's holy presence to launch an attack on his people.
A spiritual no-sail zone. It is a picture of absolute flawless security, but it raises one final inescapable problem. You can have a perfectly secure city, an unbreachable divine river, and a king ruling in absolute beauty. But if the people living inside that city are still physically broken, emotionally traumatized, and spiritually infected with sin, it isn't a paradise.
That's just a secure hospital.
Exactly. Which brings us to the ultimate crowning promise of Isaiah 33 in verse 24.
The chapter concludes with this monumental declaration. And the inhabitants shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity.
The entire intense, violent narrative culminates in total, ultimate physical and spiritual restoration. I am sick. Those three words encapsulate so much of the tragedy of the human experience.
They do.
The frailty of our bodies, the terminal diagnoses, the chronic pain. But in this quiet habitation, those words are permanently removed from the human vocabulary. They will never be spoken again.
The theological sources draw a direct, undeniable parallel here to the climax of the New Testament in Revelation 21:4.
The New Jerusalem.
That passage promises that in the New Jerusalem, God will wipe away every tear. There will be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. The physical bodies of the inhabitants will be glorified. They will no longer age, they will no longer break down, and they will never suffer again.
But the physical healing, as miraculous as it is merely the symptom of a much deeper foundational cure. The verse and the chapter ends by stating, the people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity.
The ultimate cure.
This is where the contrast of this entire text just leaves me in awe. We started this journey in verse 1 with violent extortion, brutal treachery, and a holy God promising to incinerate the wicked with devouring fire.
Right.
How do we possibly arrive here? How can a holy God, who is a consuming fire, simply forgive the deep-seated treachery and hypocrisy of his own people?
Because biblical forgiveness is never simply a sweeping of sin under the cosmic rug. The holy fire of God's justice absolutely demands to be satisfied.
It has to go somewhere.
The theological sources tie this beautiful conclusion directly to another later prophecy of Isaiah, specifically the famous 53rd chapter.
Isaiah 53.
Yes. How is the iniquity of these people forgiven? It is forgiven because the prophesied suffering servant, the Messiah, stepped into the timeline to bear our griefs and carry our sorrows. The text says the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Wow.
The prophetic type we see in Isaiah 33, mankind's desperate need for salvation from the consuming fire of divine justice, absolutely demands the antitype, which is the agonizing cross of Christ. Jesus Christ willingly absorbed the consuming fire of judgment so that the lame, broken inhabitants of the city could freely drink from the waters of grace.
It is a staggering narrative arc. It begins with woe to the spoiler. It wades through the absolute failure of human diplomacy and the terrifying exposure of divine fire. And it concludes with the free, unmerited grace, mercy, and restorative love of God for the broken.
It really is a masterpiece of Scripture.
So what does this massive theological journey mean for you, the listener, today? Why did we take this deep dive into an ancient text?
Because it's profoundly practical.
It is. Isaiah 33 is an absolute treasury of encouragement and practical strategy for the believer. We all inevitably face the Assyrians of life.
Every single one of us.
Maybe for you right now, the spoiler laying siege to your life is a literal, terrifying medical diagnosis. Maybe it is a looming, catastrophic financial ruin. Maybe it is a corrupt corporate or legal system dealing treacherously with you, breaking its covenants.
Or maybe, most terrifyingly, it is your own internal moral failure, your own hypocrisy, pressing in on your conscience like an inescapable siege.
When the enemy is at the gates, when the ecosystem of your life feels like a wilderness, the central message of Isaiah 33 is this. Wait. Pray in total dependence. Understand that God is rising.
Now is coming.
The king will eventually be seen in his absolute beauty. The tabernacle of your salvation, secured by Christ, will never be taken down by any force in the universe. And your iniquity, your deepest shame, has been forgiven.
What the sources compel us to realize is that we spend an exorbitant amount of our lives relying on the ambassadors of peace to save us. We look to shifting political alliances, rapid technological advancements, accumulated cultural status, or the size of our bank accounts to act as our broad rivers of defense.
But what happens?
The brutal historical reality that Isaiah reveals is that when the ultimate spoiler truly comes, those human treaties, those synthetic defenses, always weep bitterly in the streets. They always fail.
So as you navigate the complexities of your own life, you have to ask yourself a profound question. Are you exhausting your energy making treaties with the spoilers of this world, signing away your data, your integrity, or your peace, secretly hoping they will spare you if you just pay them enough tribute?
Or are you actively seeking the quiet habitation?
Are you striving to walk righteously, speak uprightly, and trust with absolute conviction that the king in his beauty is the only defense you will ever need?
That is the dividing line. That is the question we all have to answer.
When the devouring fire of God's presence inevitably arrives, are we going to step into it clinging to our treachery and find it to be everlasting burnings? Or are we going to step into it clothed in the righteousness of Christ and find it to be the warming, illuminating light of our eternal home?
It's something to really mull over.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We invite you to reflect on these questions, to open up Isaiah chapter 33 on your own, and to study the double exposure photograph for yourself, to acknowledge the gritty reality of the present struggle while fixing your eyes on the shimmering ultimate victory of the King.
Keep seeking the truth.
Keep questioning the systems around you, and we will see you next time.